We are thrilled to honor the Honorable Dorothy Wright Nelson, Senior Judge on the Ninth Circuit at today's event. Before we hear from Judge Nelson, we will hear a tribute from two of her former law clerks, Professors Laura Gómez and Cara Horowitz. Professor Laura Gómez teaches civil procedure and criminal law at UCLA Law, as well as upper division courses in UCLA Law's Critical Race Studies program, a program which she co-founded and served as its first director. In recent years, Professor Gómez has served as interim Dean of the Division of Social Sciences at the UCLA Law of Letters and Science, and as the Vice Dean for Faculty Development at UCLA Law. Professor Cara Horowitz is a graduate of UCLA Law and has returned to the law school to teach and to direct the Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. She has testified to the California legislature on climate policy and has been quoted in the media on such issues. Besides serving on the board of UCLA Law Women Lead, Professor Horowitz also serves on the governing boards of several local and national environmental organizations. Please welcome Professors Laura Gómez and Cara Horowitz.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'm Cara Horowitz. I'm the co-executive director of our Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment here at UCLA Law. And I'm thrilled to be here today with my colleague Laura Gómez and our beloved Judge Nelson. It's our immense pleasure to help the law school pay tribute to the Honorable Dorothy Wright Nelson, for whom Laura and I both had the privilege of clerking. This summit celebrates and advances women in law leadership. Our honoree today has been blazing paths for women in the profession since she enrolled in this law school as one of only 2 women in the class of 1953. So welcome back. And I understand, Judge, that when you were a law school student here, you worked in the library, is that right? So welcome back in particular to our beautiful library. It looks a little bit different. Her accomplishments in her more than 65-year career since that time are legion. Judge Nelson was one of the first dozen female full-time law professors in the United States. When she was chosen to be dean of USC Law School in the late 60s, no woman had ever been dean of a top American law school at that point. Time magazine took note of this accomplishment by naming her Woman of the Year. When President Carter named her to serve on the Federal Court of Appeal, along with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and a cohort of 8 others, those nominees were among the very first women federal appellate judges in the nation. Judge Nelson has been serving with distinction on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals since that time. At the core of Judge Nelson's work is a passion for justice and for marginalized communities. As just 2 examples of this, she has led delegations of negotiators to work to free prisoners persecuted because of their religious practices around the globe. She's also started a leading nonprofit educational organization, the Western Justice Center, that works to advance alternative dispute resolution, among other things by teaching conflict resolution techniques to school kids. I'm hoping she'll pay a private visit to my household later. In recognition of this pioneering work, she's won more awards than I can name here, including, I'll just select a few, the Thurgood Marshall Career Achievement Award, the Inner City Law Center Humanitarian Award, the ADR Lifetime Achievement Award, and this is my personal favorite for name only, the Lady Justice Award for Public Service from the National Association of Women Judges. I'm going to turn it over to Laura to say a few more words.
Thank you, Cara. I have to say that it's very intimidating to sit up here, come up here after this talk about speaking. And, you know, I've been a law professor for 26 years and I speak daily, you know, to lots of people, lots of students and former students. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? Like I'm thinking, am I, you know, so I'm gonna have to think about all of this, and you know, I'm usually very focused on the content, and you know, I think the other stuff comes naturally, but maybe I'm missing a whole, I could be way up there if I hadn't done that. So I want to just acknowledge the excitement of being here at a conference like this, and seeing I actually have never been in the library for an event like this, between the stacks and all of that. And I know some of you in the audience came when there was the mural, the Naked Man mural on the back, which is gone now, and the rest of you are gonna be wondering, what are they talking about? So over lunch, you can ask somebody and find out about that. It is an honor to be here and to see so many generations of women lawyers and lawyers-to-be here in one place. And Cara has mentioned that Judge Dorothy W. Nelson was one of 2 students when she graduated. And over time, we have seen increasing numbers. When Cara graduated from UCLA in 2001, she was in the first majority women, I'm sure it was a small majority, class, and that was a national trend, as many of you know, and I'm teaching criminal law right now to 78 1Ls, and 41 of them are women. And it is quite, I think that's a good, we should give it a hand, yeah. And so the feel of law school is very different than when I attended in the late 1980s, having that much of a presence. But it actually hasn't meant that everything is solved. Women students are still finding themselves hampered in ways, sometimes speaking out in class. You know, I'm gonna be teaching our sexual assault unit in a few weeks, and some women students have told me in the post Kavanaugh era that they're very reticent about talking about that, and et cetera. And so there's still many things to be done, although this numerical parity makes a huge, huge difference. So when I clerked for Judge Nelson, it was starting in the fall of the summer of 1991, and it was the first time, Judge, that you had hired 3 women clerks. And what was interesting about that is that women were not that great a percentage of the clerks in that moment, the law graduates. So it was a really exciting time in that way. I learned so many things working for you, Judge, and I'm so grateful. Sometimes it was little things like, Judge Nelson taught me that if you are going to be talking to people, and especially if you're going to have a difficult conversation with them, feed them. And she always had cookies and her famous lemonade punch. In chambers and for various events. And I'm sure that food came in handy with your Ninth Circuit colleagues on many a case. I learned a graciousness, I don't always follow it the way you do. I don't always succeed, but I learned that I needed to be gracious and generous. And I think a lot of that fundamental generosity that Judge Nelson brings to everything she does, from working earlier this week with, I think, 140 elementary students, or K through 12 students.
200 high school and elementary.
200 students. That was Wednesday, I think. Last night, until all hours, she was taping a podcast. But that generosity and that constant giving back, it really comes out of her Baha'i faith. And that was, for me, that was a learning moment. I had not known anyone who was Baha'i until I met the judge. And you live your faith in a way that's beautiful, and it was a model to all of us clerks. I know that I'm running out of time, but I'm going to take a few more minutes. I want to share one anecdote with you, and then I'm going to stop talking. So I'm teaching causation, or I've recently finished teaching causation in criminal law. And I was thinking about my career and the tremendous role that the judge has played. And I thought, okay, my parents are the but-for cause of my career, right? Without them, I could not be here. But Judge Nelson is the proximate cause of my career. And so I had this anecdote picked out, and it just so happens that Dean Susan Prager, Dean of Southwestern Law School, who was the first woman dean at UCLA Law and who was dean for 15 years, it just so happens that she's another proximate cause of my career, and so she's in this anecdote. So it's fall of 1991. I'm on the job market for teaching jobs, academic teaching jobs, and I was getting a lot of play. I was getting these interviews. I had what the law school world does is you would have a preliminary interview. So Harvard Law School flew me out to have lunch, and that was the first round interview in Penn and Texas and Berkeley. And the judge was so proud of me and letting me know she was excited about all this. But every so often she'd be saying, well, have you heard from UCLA yet? And I'd be like, no, I really, really would love UCLA, but I haven't heard from them yet. And one day she comes in and she's like, enough of this. I'm gonna see Dean Prager tonight at an event, and I'm gonna make sure that she's in touch with you. And lo and behold, the next day, I got a call from Associate Dean Julian Ewell inviting me to come and talk to the appointments committee in Westwood. And so, I am very grateful, Judge, for so many things that I've learned from you, and to Dean Prager for hiring me, for taking a chance on me. And it's now my final duty to introduce our third female dean at UCLA Law, the wonderful and illustrious Jennifer Mnookin, who is a star in all ways. She is a wonderful scholar. She's won the teaching award here, and her service to the university and to the law school is unparalleled. So please join me in welcoming Jennifer Mnookin.
Thanks so much, Laura and Cara. And thank you most of all to Judge Dorothy Nelson for being with us today and letting us celebrate and honor you. I am just so delighted to have you with us for this conversation. And we're going to get started in just 1 minute, but I want to tell you three exciting things first. First of all, both Cara and Laura, as you know, clerked for Judge Nelson, but we have a couple of other people here who did as well. Would you just stand up too so we can celebrate and recognize you as well as anybody who clerked for Judge Nelson who's in the room? Second of all, we have members of 49 graduating classes in this room with us today. And that's just something we should notice and celebrate you as one of our first female grads getting that going. And finally, I'm very excited to announce that the law school is also going to get to celebrate Judge Nelson in one additional way. We are creating a full, thanks to the generosity of a large set of alums, as well as some of her former clerks who did not go to UCLA Law School. We are creating a full tuition scholarship for one of our achievement fellows, and it will bear Judge Nelson's name. And so we are so thrilled to get to tell you all about that. And now, enough from me. We want to hear from you.
Well, I would love to have you here. How wonderful your deans have been. And I knew Susan when I was a dean, but as the deans have come along, Jennifer, you were simply outstanding. I tried to hire your father. When I was
He's
dean,
in the room somewhere, actually. Is he speaking later?
Really?
There he is, right?
Well,
there.
But I lost, but the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. And Jennifer, I will take you anytime.
Well, thank you. I would love to start with, you really have been such a pioneer in so many ways. I'm sitting next to not only Lady Justice, but in a person of extraordinary both intelligence and grace. But you also really were a pioneer. I'd love you to tell us some story about what it was like to be the first woman dean of a prominent law school, one of the first female judges in such a position of authority. I know you've got a lot of anecdotes to choose from here, but I think we'd all really benefit from hearing some reflections on what it was like to have leadership positions in spaces where there were not very many people who looked like you.
I was very lucky at UCLA in having Dean Roscoe Pound, the former dean of the Harvard Law School, for a number of classes. There were many things about the law that disturbed me. And he said that the way justice is accessed is more important than the law itself. So I was emboldened when I was outraged. I was in law school before Brown versus Board of Education. I keep raising my hand. How do we let this happen? So, dear Dean Pound recommended me for my research job at USC. And of course, that was a little difficult when I filled in for a law professor who was called to Europe, and his class had not been very good. So Mickey Mouse could have gone in and improved it. And at the end of the class, the students went in and said, hire her, hire her. The dean, with a smile, said, but she's a woman. And then he hired me. Well, when I finally went on the faculty, I was really very graciously welcomed by the male faculty, but it was their wives that I sensed on various occasions. Why are you here? Are you after my husband? So I decided that I would have them all to dinner a couple of times to see that I loved my husband, I loved my children, and we became very good friends. 3 of the wives signed up for my seminar. And made me a little nervous, but I was happy to have them there. But my point is this: don't give up being a woman. Dear Laura mentioned that I'm a member of the Baha'i faith. And the principle of the equality of women and men, in fact, I heard it first at the UCLA Law School when 17 members of my class, after having a Baha'i in our class, heard him speak about equality of women and men. Over the next 10 years, 17 became Baha'is. But in my own faith, men and women are like the 2 wings of a bird. The one is male, the other is female. Unless both wings are strong, the bird can't fly heavenwards. But if you look at a bird, you can't transfer the right wing to the left. Women should have equal opportunity, equal education, equal pay, but they have separate and unique qualities that must be brought to the table if we're even to have world peace. So I found again when I became dean, an older faculty member said, show up to meeting 15 minutes late and show them who's boss. Well, instead, I went home and made 5 dozen chocolate chip cookies. I announced that the faculty would finally have food. And my point is, don't be afraid to follow your instincts as a woman. I found the same thing when I went on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and went to my first meeting. There was no coffee, no tea, no water. The meeting would start and everybody would be pretty cordial. And we had very different views. About 2 o'clock, people would begin snipping at each other. About 3 o'clock, some would even walk out. I went up to the chief judge and said, why don't we have some refreshments at our
There's
meetings?
a food theme. I like it.
I said, I'll pay for them. Why? That's a wonderful idea, he said. We will have refreshments. The amazing thing is the tenor of the room changed from then on. People were, not that they weren't always bad, but they weren't always courteous or careful with their language. But the use of food made that difference. So thank you for mentioning that. It sounds silly.
I think there's 2 lessons there. One is that, as Laura put it as well, that hard conversations are best with a little bit of nourishment and maybe even sweets, and also to be yourself, that you can be in a role of leadership while still holding on to what's core to you. I think that's powerful. So thank you for sharing that. I'd like to link it up to something much larger, really, which is sort of peace and dispute resolution, both of which I know are very central to you. And you've thought a lot about and care a lot about dispute resolution, both through formal legal systems and otherwise. You helped create the Western Justice Center. You've been very focused on how to help us resolve disputes better. Could you tell us a little more about that?
I'd be very happy to. When I became a Baha'i, Baha'is around the world resolve everything through consultation, which is a high form of mediation. So in my seminar on law reform, I added mediation to the curriculum. Mind you, this is in 1957. I go to my first faculty meeting, and somebody at the end of the table said, "What's Dorothy teaching? Mediation. That's not law." The response was, "Oh, she's just trying to make people love each other." Well, my experience now, mediation is the hottest topic in the justice system today. And when I approached our chief judge, we're on the Court of Appeals. There were mediators on the district court, the lower court. I shouldn't say that. The trial court. They do not like to be referred to as the lower court. And they're probably the most important court because they're dealing directly with the people. And I said to him, "Chief Judge Browning, why don't we have a mediator?" He said, "Oh, Dorothy, dear, if people win below, why would they want to mediate?" I said, "Because we may cause them to lose. But more importantly, they may find a better solution than we can give them." And one quick example, Arizona, there are the Navajos surround the Hopi Indians. A Hopi went to Berkeley Law School and came home, took out a map and said, "Navajos are living on our land." Navajos said, and this was sort of Indian speak, "We've been living here since 1902. You don't need the land, we need the land, and we're not moving." So he went to court. He won on the basis of an 1896 treaty showing that it was Hopi land. Well, the Navajos, most of them young Navajos, went out and bought guns. "We believe in peace, but we can defend our homes." We then had a wonderful, one of our first mediators who had worked on the Indian reservation 2 of his summers. To make a story short, that mediation took 6 weeks. It was because the mediator was patient and he knew Indian culture. And the elder Hopi would take the map, take the elder Navajo, and they'd circle of the land. The result was the Hopis agreed to let the Navajos stay if they would sign a document acknowledging it was Hopi land. They exchanged $1, and a light rain came down, which to both tribes was a sign that this was a good thing. And there is the Navajo Hopi Housing Authority down there. The Hopis now are selling their land at a reasonable price, and the guns have been put away. If it had come to my court, the treaty said it was Hopi land, and that would have been it. So I greatly believe we have now 9 mediators going on 10. They heard 1,000 cases in the Ninth Circuit last year. They resolved 85%. Now, there are many judges. I got some hate mail. Now I get love mail because there are a lot of lawyers who say they recognize the value, the adversary system we need for some cases, but otherwise it's too costly, too ineffective, too destructive, the words of former Chief Justice Berger, for a civilized society. So I do hear cases, but often in cases where I'm sitting on a 3-judge panel, I said, this case really ought to go to mediation. In the old days, it would say, no, judge. Now everyone says, yes, let's do it. So I feel that people can see how some cases can be resolved very quickly. And that's why some judges and some lawyers and some community people and I started this Western Justice Center. We train teachers on how to train everything from first grade through 12th, how to teach their students to be mediators. The peer mediators, we were just visited our court this week. When there are things like racism, bullying, sexism, and the peer mediator who has been trained, the student has the choice to go to the principal or to go to the peer mediator. Well, guess what? Most want to go to the peer mediator. At our peer mediation invitational, they exchange stories. And at the Western Justice Center, we have established for free online school tools for teachers who want to train, lesson plans, videos, and the like. But more importantly, we have a chat room for mediators in these schools. If they say, oh, we have a problem with, there were 7 kids coming in who had all been using the N-word for this one poor child. How do you deal with 7 mediators? Well, the other mediators, other schools will say, this is what we've done. And so we've established across the United States, and the school tools have been picked up in 70 countries, how to teach children to resolve conflict peacefully. And you go like this when I should stop, but I just have to say.
This is great.
One at our peer mediation invitational, one of the 7th graders raised his hand and said, well, we're learning how to resolve conflict peacefully. Why don't you teach everybody how to do that so that we can have world peace? So I said, that's your job. To do that in your community. But thank you for asking about that.
That is a fabulous answer. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your approach to judging, since not all disputes get resolved through mediation or through these other techniques, and then they do get to your court sometimes. And are there any sort of first principles or any ways you think about what feel to you like the hardest decisions that you'd be able to share with us today?
I have dissented in some cases, but as I tell my law clerks, my goal is to bring about agreement. And if I have to give up a favorite argument, but it's not necessary, I'll give it up. One of my first cases, I hate to call judges on the right or the left, but the newspapers do. And I had one judge on the right, one judge on the left, and I was in the middle, and I got assigned the complaint. Here again, becoming friends with all the judges on the courts. There are a few things where we disagree, primarily in immigration cases and in death penalty cases. But if you become friends from your adversary, they're anxious, I find, to make you happy, just as you're anxious to bring them all together. But there are certain things where I feel the need to dissent. And I have a recent case dealing with slavery in South Africa. And the question is one of jurisdiction, because the company is incorporated in Europe, also in the United States. But the child slaves used are paid for by the United States. And there are certain judges that do not feel we should look to international law, that we should not look to international standards of morality, etc. And sincerely believe that. I disagree with that. I was on a panel with Madeleine Albright and said, do you think federal judges ought to look to foreign law? I said, well, absolutely. She said, did I hear you correctly? That's not what I hear. At any rate, those other cases, they're very few. I have dissented very few times. And when I meet with my law clerks, of course, they're the best part of being a federal judge. I have to honestly say, I could not do this job without the joy of having my outstanding clerks advising me. But after we have oral argument, I come in and meet with the clerks, and I'll either come in like this or I'll come in like this, saying I didn't succeed, not because of the clerks, but because I was unable to. But those are very few and far between.
So a strong preference for building consensus.
Yes.
Willingness to dissent when you have no choice about it.
And willingness to be what I call an active listener. Mm-hmm. I found on some of my panels, the judge came in, made up his mind. We all read the briefs, we read our clerk's memos, and I could be shouting to the stars, and I'll be looking at his papers as I'm talking. But they're very few. Most judges are good, active listeners, and I think I have to be a good, active listener. And believe it or not, I can be convinced I'm wrong.
That's becoming a rarer characteristic, I think. I wanted to circle back to your Baha'i faith, which I know has been an important part of your life and also your philosophy of judging. I also want to just come back to the fact that after your graduation, 17 of your classmates ended up becoming Baha'i afterwards, in part inspired by you. Could you tell us something about the way that your faith has shaped your judicial philosophy and your life?
The faith is worldwide. And when I went as a law professor to talk about mediation, say in China or in India or Norway and so forth, people would politely clap, "Thank you for coming, Judge," and that would be the end. I go as a federal judge. How do we do it? How do we start? Will you, and our internet program, School Tools, are going to China and going to India and going to Europe. And the lawyers in this country now, there is an organization called JAMS that is creating programs all over Europe. If I had not been a Baha'i and taken this on because I truly was upset with the justice system, I was upset with access to justice, and with dear Roscoe Pound, believe it or not, we used to take him to breakfast. Ollie Hammond's, he'd have mush, which was really cream of wheat. Then he would give you a cigar, and we collected Roscoe Pound cigars. That was his way of making connection with the students. But
Interesting. Times have changed a bit.
his teaching was profound in that don't worry about all these bad laws. Just work on whether there is access to justice. And similarly, when I was dean, we established with UCLA and with Loyola the Western Center on Law and Poverty to improve access to justice for people in the community who did not have it.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one final question. So we have one of the pillars of LEAD is to be intergenerational and to connect our graduates at all levels of the profession with younger alums and with current students. And so we have a very intergenerational group in the room. But I'd like this question to be directed to the current students in the room. They're just forging their careers as a lawyer. What advice would you give to them?
Well, I have many friends in the room, by the way. I was delighted how you all got out of the office and got here today. First of all, decide for yourself, why am I here? Where am I going? What do I want to be when I grow up? In this sense, there are many unhappy lawyers out there. The adversary system is sort of destructive to people's lives. We're always fighting, not for justice, but you're fighting to win. So I have one outstanding former student who went with a big law firm, and many of my former clerks are very happy in law firms, but he would call me every day. I'm working for this firm during the day, but I'm working for the poor at night. I want you to know, Judge Nelson, we had, with the LA County Bar, maybe 25 years ago, a program for lawyers who wanted to be mediators. They gave us a little room for 40 people. 200 showed up. Many law firms now are adding mediators to their offices with law degrees. People who want to bring people together, and they don't have to lose a lot of money doing that. But my advice would be to talk to a lot of people. Sometimes you have to go and get a job and pay off your law school debts, and that's perfectly fine. But once you get your big house and your big car and your big salary, the thought of going to a public interest firm, it's a difficult choice. But when you wake up in the morning, bring yourself to account. Am I doing something that is going to contribute to my community and to my life? And constantly, just because other people got this position or this person got a raise, are you happy, would be my question. And if not, when will you be?
I can't think of a better way or place to end. I want to thank you for being both approachable and authoritative.
I wish I'd had her course before I came.
And most of all, I want to thank you for being a shining light and an inspiration to so many of us in this room and so many well beyond this room. Thank you for doing UCLA Law School proud. And thank you for being with us today, Judge Nelson.
I get the last word. Thank you, Jennifer Mnookin, and all of my dear friends, and I look around this room and see them, for all you are doing to make my alma mater I'm so proud of my alma mater. Thank you.
Thank you.